Hey everybody, Dr. Greg here. So, it's October, it's Fallout. I even have my hoodie on because it's getting chilly and I love it. This is my type of weather. But another thing that I absolutely love is this means that Halloween is coming, which means that people are there's a lot of horror movies that we can watch, and people are really curious about horror games that they can play in VR, and there are a lot of them. You'll notice that I titled this the absolute scariest games you can play in VR and not the scariest VR games. The reason for that is, if you've watched the channel a while, first, you know that I absolutely love horror. It's my favorite genre. Second, you know that I will do about anything to get those games into VR, if it's VorpX or mods or whatever. So it's not just VR games that we're going to be covering. It's some flat games that we use other methods to get into VR so we can experience horror in VR, because the way I feel, it's really the only way to experience horror. Flat just doesn't do it for me anymore. When you're used to being in the horror and not being able to get away from it when it's all around you, it's just so much better. So the way that I categorize these games, we're going to start off with kind of like the horror light games. So these are games that if you're new to VR horror and you're not really sure if you want to experience it, that aren't going to be so absolutely terrifying that you'll ever want to do it again. And then you can just kind of go through them and work your way up to the most intense horror experiences that you can have in VR. So without further ado, make sure you hit like and subscribe and click on the little bell thingy and all that fun stuff. Comment on the video. What's the scariest game you've ever played in VR? Tell me about it. If I haven't played it, man, I might like to, because there really hasn't been a whole lot this year for horror games in VR, at least. So anyway, we'll talk about that in the comments. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll talk about some of the absolute scariest games that you can play in VR. The first game I'd like to talk about is, well, for me, the OG horror game in VR. I mean, there were other games that came out before this, but this was one of the very first that I experienced in VR myself, and it's Wolfenwood's Chair in a Room. Now, if you haven't played this game, it's basically a series of escape rooms set in a horror theme, and you're just trying to figure out this very, very dark story. You start out, you're in an asylum. You know, that's kind of a common theme a lot of times in horror games, and you just kind of have to figure out what's going on throughout the games, through a series of escape rooms that, and they're absolutely terrifying. There was a couple times that I did have to like nope out, just because, you know, it was like really dark. I didn't want to go in there, that type of stuff. Something that's really, really interesting about this game, this was back, like I said, one of the OG like VR games back in the, you know, early 2015, 2016 time, where room scale was kind of a thing. So we don't get a ton of room scale now, but Chair in a Room is 100% room scale. So there's really no need for any type of artificial locomotion. It just puts the rooms right, builds them right into your play space, so you can just kind of walk around and do it. So that's really cool. So you don't have to worry about any problems with motion sickness or anything like that. One of my favorite things to do with people new to VR, new to VR horror experience, is to put them in a kind of an extra DLC type room that came later from Chair in a Room. I think it's called The Missing Girl. Once again, it's an escape room, and it has some absolutely fantastic scares in it, and it's just creepy AF. So there we go. That was our very first one, Chair in a Room. The next game I'd like to talk about is Layers of Fear from Bloober Team. Now, this was originally a flat game. It's a walking sim, and has been ported over to VR. A really nice port. I play it on PC VR. I think you can get it on Quest 2 as well. I think, maybe not. I'm not even sure on that one. But anyway, yeah, it's just a walking sim. You're basically walking around this mansion trying to figure out what happened in it. There's, you know, obviously a painter lived there, and there's his scary story that went on with his wife and his baby, and it's a really interesting take on horror. There's a ton of jump scares in this one, which personally I really love. But there's also a whole lot of psychological horror in this game, where you'll be walking around and paintings will change, or you're not quite sure if they changed, or rooms will completely change on you when your back is turned. So yeah, this is a really cool little story. I don't think this is a horror game that's going to be so bad that it's going to just completely make you mess yourself. So give Layers of Fear a shot. And then we have another horror game from Team Bloober, or Bloober Team, the Blair Witch. You can get this one on PC and Quest 2. Personally, I would highly recommend you get it on PC VR if you can, because it just looks so much better on PC VR than it does on the Quest 2. It's another walking sim type game. Hey, you have a pet dog, so that's nice. You have a kind of a companion a lot of times to get you through the scare. This one's a slow starter. It's not too terribly scary. I mean, the forest is pretty. It's a great environment. Lots of little puzzles that you have to solve in it and try to figure the story out. You're looking for a lost kid in the woods where the Blair Witch movie happened. So it slowly builds over time. Like I said, it's kind of got a backstory. Your character suffers from PTSD, and you'll get little flashbacks and stuff like that in like cinematic view. But there were some times where it definitely made me scream. So it does have some horror. This game definitely gets a lot scarier towards the end. The last chapter of it, you're in this kind of scary like house type thing, and that one made me jump a lot. It got really scary towards the end, but at the beginning it's not too terribly bad. So it'll kind of wean you in to the horror experience. So yeah, give Blair Witch a try. The next game I'd like to talk about is a Taiwanese horror from, and I don't know exactly how to pronounce the name of the studio. It's YGG Drazzle Group. Co-Ltd, or yeah, so Yggdrasil, not really sure. But Home Sweet Home is a Taiwanese horror game. It's got a lot of cat and mouse in it. It's got some puzzle solving to do. It's got kind of a creepy story that goes through it. And I gotta say, for a small studio, this game, you could tell that like the character models and stuff aren't great, but it actually was a really scary little title. It's one of my favorite like made for VR horror games. I think this was also a port that they ended up making into a VR game later. It's on PC VR. I don't believe this one is on Quest 2 at all. And it's fantastic. It's got some that Taiwanese type horror theme to it. So lots of dark rooms, it's a couple of interesting monsters. It's a good time. So the one thing I will say about Home Sweet Home, it does have some psychological horror and all that kind of stuff, but this game has probably what I have to say the absolute worst ending to any game I have ever played. So play with it and enjoy it. Just be prepared to be just like WTF at the end, like that's the end, really? Because that's the way you feel when you end Home Sweet Home. Okay, the next game that I'm going to put in here might throw some people for a loop. I don't really consider this one a horror game, but there are people that probably will. So I'm going to include Skydance Interactive's Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. Now, this game, like I said, I don't feel like it's a horror game, but I will say that it's probably one of the, if not the absolute best made for VR game there is. It is absolutely fantastic. It's not really scary, even though I will say the high school, that is one scary place. So if you really want to be scared, go walk around that high school for a while. You've got walkers everywhere, or zombies, whatever you want to call them. You've got people that you have to deal with. It's got a great kind of open world feel to it, with a lot of RPG components, some crafting and scavenging, and it really nails that Walking Dead feel. You're basically the tourist, which is just some dude running around in New Orleans. There's a new part part 2 that's coming out. I think it's Redemption or something like that. That's coming out pretty soon. So I really can't wait for that. But get on this game. There's just tons of absolutely fantastic melee, which, you know, melee can be a real pain in VR games, but they just absolutely nailed it in this one. Amazing physics, really fun zombies, really great story and characters, and it's just a lot of fun. It was, like I said, one of the absolute best made for VR games that there is. Not really terribly scary, but definitely deserves to be on this list. Okay, so the games are starting to get scarier and a little more difficult. And the next one that I'd like to talk to is Outer Brain Studios' Organ Quarter. Organ Quarter is a really fun one. It's got the PS2 style graphics. It has very much a Silent Hill inspired game. It really reminds me a lot of Silent Hill. It's definitely got those survival horror aspects to it, like limited save points and, you know, inventory management, that type of thing. Really grotesque, creepy looking enemies that you have to deal with, fun boss fights. So yeah, it does that thing where, like, you know, you go through a door to open, but instead of just having the door open and being able to see and walk through, it does the old survival horror trick where it completely blacks you out for a second, so you don't know where you're going to end up when you know, you can see and you're on the other side of that door, and that's really effective and very scary. So yeah, this is a really fun little game. I think it's one that anybody can enjoy, especially if you're a fan of the old PS2 style survival horror games in Silent Hill. So give Organ Quarter a try. Okay, my next game is the last of the horror light games, and actually happens to be probably my number 2 favorite game that was released last year. Resident Evil 4 was VR was number 1 on the Quest 2, but this game is from White Door Studios, Cosmodread, same people that brought Dread Halls in, which you could probably even put Dread Halls in this category. Cosmodread is a roguelike game. You're basically trapped on a space station. Something's happened on this station. You've got to just walk around and figure out what it is. It's very dark. The atmosphere is fantastic. The sound design is insanely good. It's got some really good body horror in it. It has a very Dead Space feel to it. Not quite as insane as Dead Space, but still has that kind of a feel to it. And you have to basically walk around the station, and you've got a few things that you have to do to try and get off the station and get back to Earth. And if you die, well, guess what? You get to start all over again. It's all procedural, so it's all different. Everything's in different locations. So it's got a ton of replay value. Yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. And like I said, not so scary that people, but it is pretty scary. Don't get me wrong. That's it. But I will say, a game like this, the more you play it, the less scary it is. It is more of a panic type situation. But man, when you first put it on, it's absolutely terrifying. So give Cosmodread a try. It's like one of my favorite games from last year. All right, now we are getting into it. We're getting into the shit. These are the horror games. These are games that you definitely need to be prepared and maybe wear your brown pants for. The number 1 game, now this is like not the scariest. We're going to start down at the bottom, but the first one that I have on this list is Resident Evil Village. Now, this game you can play, the first time I played it with VorpX, and I got to tell you, it actually worked really well with VorpX. It used Z3D. But it still was great, and I really enjoyed it. But you don't have to use VorpX anymore, because the amazing modder Praydog made a mod for this game for PC VR, and it has full motion controls on it, and it's absolutely fantastic. This game is very crazy, over the top, campy, cinematic. It's just that crazy campy Capcom style of horror. It's just magnificent. It's beautiful. The character models are insanely good. It's got really, really, really great boss fights. As I said, it's not the scariest of the games, but it's definitely just a wild, crazy, adrenaline-filled theme park ride, basically. It's just nuts. There is one area with this big giant baby that's pretty freaking scary. But other than that, there's not a lot of terror in this game. Another game that I'm just gonna throw in there, I'm not gonna officially have it on this list, but Resident Evil 4, I kind of mentioned it a little bit before, on the Quest 2 is very much like Village, very action based, just a crazy ride and super fun. So those two I would highly recommend. The next one on the seriously scary list of games you could play in VR would have to be Doom 3. Now, this Doom 3 is interesting. There's a couple ways you can play it. You can play the BFG edition on PC VR with the Fully Possessed mod, which is a fantastic mod. So many things you can do in that one. Or there's also a Quest 2 mod that from the Team Beef, from Dr. Beef. And the game plays absolutely fantastic on the Quest 2 as well. It's just got Doom 3 has such a great use of atmosphere. It's quite a departure from the first couple Doom games. There's a lot of psychological horror. There is a lot of jump scares. And it's just really just fast-paced, just crazy action in this game. So this is one of those where you may have to go the PC VR route with the Fully Possessed mod if you have problems with motion sickness, because like I said, it is fast. With that one, you can adjust your walking speed. I'm not sure if you can with Team Beef's mod. You might be able to, but I do know in the PC VR version, that mod, you can use teleport. So that would really help people a lot with motion sickness. It's just absolutely fun. I did finally just beat this one, not too long ago. I just streamed it, and I just had an absolute blast the whole time. So definitely check out Doom 3 in VR. Okay, so this next one has a remake coming up here pretty quick. That would be, what's the name of that studio? EA or Motive was the name of the developer. Electronic Arts Dead Space. Now, Dead Space I played in VorpX. It was still in third person, which was fine. Third person games actually work really well in VR. And VorpX worked incredibly well with Dead Space. You do have to do a FOV tweak to get it to work really well. And don't use the VorpX FOV thing. That is a terrible slider and it messes up all kinds of effects and all that kind of stuff. So you don't want to use that. But Dead Space, man. What a absolutely brutal survival horror game. This one is not for the light of heart. It's incredibly violent and gory and just non-stop stress. It's got amazing enemies and environments and game design, sound design. And I gotta say, this is one of those games where after every play session I had, it's another one that I streamed, I just felt absolutely destroyed. It's not very often that I play a game where I'm just like, when I'm done with it, I was like, man, I have got to take a break. This one is killing me because it's just so stressful. But in VR, I got to tell you, man, it is freaking magic. So let's hope for a Luke Ross actual VR mod instead of just VorpX, because in first person, this would be even more insane. So yeah, Dead Space, man, play it in VR. This next game is probably one of my absolute favorite made for VR horror games. It is VRWorks Paranormal Activity: The Lost Soul. This game is fantastic. Now I play it on PC VR, and anytime there's a choice, I'm always going to recommend PC VR. There is a Quest 2 version of this game. I've never played it, so I really can't comment on it or recommend it. The PC VR version though is fantastic. It's a walking sim, probably very heavily inspired by PT type gameplay. It has procedural scares in it, so that's great. Every time I've played this game, something different happens that I've never seen before. So things like chairs being stacked up on a table. I was like, well, that's never happened before. So it's pretty cool in that respect. Gives it some replayability. It's a pretty dark story. You're just walking around this house trying to figure out what happened in it. It's absolutely beautiful. That the graphics are just gorgeous. It's weird seeing these older VR games and how absolutely great they looked because they weren't trying to conform to a Quest 2 Android mobile style operating system and all of that, and chipset. So the game is absolutely beautiful. The sound design is incredible. Like I said, randomized scares. Not a lot of jump scares. There are some, but it's very, very heavily psychologically scary. So yeah, I definitely do this one. It's just an absolute fantastic haunted house to be in. Paranormal Activities: The Lost Soul. So I couldn't have a horror discussion and video without talking about Red Barrel's Outlast titles. Now there's 3 of them right now that you can play in VR. I did use VorpX for this. Unfortunately, these games are Unreal 3, so the Unreal VR injector is not going to work, so you still have to use VorpX. I did use immersive screen on this one, so it was still in 3D, but it wasn't full VR. But immersive screen was still the best way, and the scariest way, and the most immersive way that you can play these games for now. So you got to break them up in as how scary they are, and in a way that's kind of difficult because they're kind of different games. I'm going to start though with the least, I would say, scary game. But probably the most disturbing, sickest game I've ever played, which is Outlast 2. Outlast 2, you're in the set, you're on the, you're in a helicopter crash, you're trapped out in the mountains, I think in West Virginia or something like that, and there's these crazy religious cults, there's more than one, and they're all going after you, and it's just so scary. You've got your typical Outlast, night vision camera or recording camera to use. And it does this thing where you kind of shift between the cultish area out in the mountains that you're in, and then all of a sudden you're back in time in this crazy scary high school. It's got kind of a real Silent Hill vibe, the way you're kind of flipping back and forth in your environment. The school actually for me was much scarier than the cult people. And there's this crazy evil thing that's always chasing you around, and it is absolutely scary. This game, I'm going to say there's some trigger warnings. If you're triggered by things like sexual abuse or suicide or anything like that, there's a warning for you, because it is in this game, and it like I said, it's a very, very disturbing, sick game, and the story is just it's absolutely crazy sick. There's a ton of gore in this one, but this goes without saying with any of the Outlast games. So after Outlast 2, I'll go to Outlast 1. Once again, played in VorpX, or just Outlast. It's not called Outlast 1. And you are a reporter, and you're going into this what you think is an abandoned asylum. I don't know if it's supposed to be abandoned or not. You've got a letter from this whistleblower, and so you're going in to investigate to see what happened in this asylum up on the hill. And once you get in there, you're trapped, of course, and you have no way to fight or anything like that. All you have to do is run and hide, and that's just Outlast games in general. It's total cat and mouse. This one, once again, used VorpX, did it in immersive screen, and it scared the crap out of me. It is extremely scary, very, very disturbing, just absolutely brilliant game, amazing environment, great sound design. It's a good length game. So definitely Outlast 1, fantastic. And then the scariest of the Outlast titles, also really disturbing, is the Whistleblower DLC. Now this is only a couple hour experience compared to the other games, but I loved it so much. You've got some new characters in there that are chasing you around, including Eddie Gluskin, which is just probably one of the most demented characters you'll ever deal with in a video game. Yeah, just great. It builds on everything the first game did, and it does it better. It's DLC done right. One of the best DLCs I've ever done. So that's my order with the Outlast games. 2, then 1, and then Whistleblower definitely is the best. So definitely check those titles out. This next game is actually kind of a series of parts. It was kind of released episodic. It comes from Wolf and Wood, the same people that did A Chair in a Room, and that is Exorcist Legion. And this game is a made for VR game. It's absolutely fantastic. There's the PC VR version. Quest 2, once again, I haven't played the Quest 2 version. but I can tell you on PC VR, it's really, really good. You are a detective in Boston, and you're trying to solve all of these crazy cases that involve. Looks like, I think it's was it Pazuzu? Is that the name of the demon? So you have a bunch of cases, different scenarios. You start in a church, and there's one where you go to some people's house, and there's one where you go to a mental hospital, and there's one where you go to the Africa, I think, and then you go into the caves, and that's the final chapter. They're all great, varying degrees of scary. The great thing about these games is the really amazing use of physics. Pretty much everything is interactable, so that's really cool. There were several times with this one that I had to nope out and come back later. It's really, really well done. There are some jump scares. Most of it's super psychological though, and generally speaking, like religious theme stuff doesn't get me all that much. But this one, oh my gosh, I gotta tell you, there is a room, there's a baby's room that you've got to go in, and it's dark, and I stood in the doorway and looked and stared at that room for I don't know how long before I was like, nope, can't do it, and I had to come back the next day. I could not force myself to walk across that room. And there's just several instances like that in this game. So definitely one of the absolute best VR horror games out there. So definitely get yourself Exorcist Legion if you're looking for a good time. Okay, so we've done Resident Evil Village. Now we get to what I'm going to say is the second scariest Resident Evil game that you can play in VR, and that is Resident Evil 7. Now, this one is interesting because it originally launched as a native VR title on the PSVR way back when. Now, it was only gamepad game, and this was the game that convinced me that playing VR with gamepad is okay, because I absolutely enjoyed it. It's the best VR title on the PSVR, in my opinion. It's just fantastic. But that being said, if you have PC VR, don't even bother with the PSVR version, because PreyDog, once again, just like Resident Evil Village, made this amazing mod with full motion controls, beautiful crystal clear PC VR graphics. It's just insane. The Resident Evil 7 has this very like Texas Chainsaw vibe going on, which is kind of a weird departure for Resident Evil. I know it turned a lot of people off, but what it does so right, first of all, the characters, the family, the Bakers are just, they're great. They're truly awesome enemies to have. This game brings back the survival horror formula that was kind of starting to disappear actually since Resident Evil 4 on in the Resident Evil titles. So it brings back that whole formula with the inventory management and the keys for the different doors and the big scary house and the separate locations that it just felt like a Resident Evil game, and that's one of the things I really loved about this game. Resident Evil 7, definitely a great horror title to play in VR. The one thing I would say that's kind of disappointing about Resident Evil 7 is it does have a lack of enemy variety. There's just not that much there. But really, that's probably my only complaint about the game. It has some really great DLC too, especially the Not a Hero DLC is fantastic. So get Resident Evil 7. Definitely do it. Just do it. Do it on PC VR if you can. And of course, that leads us logically to the scariest Resident Evil game you can play in VR, and one of my all-time favorite games of all time, the Resident Evil 2 remake. Oh my god, using PreyDog's mod with this is just, it's heaven. It's a complete dream come true. You have full motion controls, once again, stuff, physical knife, like, where you can really slash the knife to like hack the enemies and stuff like that is fantastic. The prison is terrifying, the prison area. But like the police station is so beautifully realized with this mod. It's just absolutely gorgeous. All of those locations are. You have these crazy ass looking zombies in this game. They're the absolute best zombies in any game ever. And in VR, I cannot express how terrifying they are. The destruction of the models is so good. It's just awesome. And then, of course, you've got Mr. X to deal with, which is so scary hearing him stomp around outside your save room, wondering if you're safe to go out. The lickers are insanely good. Just so terrifying when you have to walk by them in VR and try not to alert them. It's so, and of course, you've got just amazing boss fights. And the second run on this game, never skip out on the second run. It's absolutely brutal, especially at the beginning of it. Now, the story isn't quite as good as the original Resident Evil 2 because of the way the second run works. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of the same things that you do that don't really make sense, but just throw that out the window because the game is a freaking masterpiece. So totally, if you're ever going to play any Resident Evil game in VR, do not skip out on Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's the absolute best. The next game is kind of bittersweet for me. It's actually the second scariest game on my list. I absolutely loved it. It's so terrified. I just don't like the studio all that much. And that is Sad Square Studios' Visage. I think the British say Visage, but I say Visage. Anyway, Visage is just absolutely terrifying. I played this game in VorpX. It works really, really well in VorpX. I found a direct 3D scannable profile for it. It still wasn't perfect because it's VorpX, but it's definitely scarier than playing it flat, and it worked really well in full VR. Now, I'm gonna say, I would hold out. I wouldn't play this one on VorpX. We're gonna skip this for a second because Visage is a Unreal 4 engine or Unreal Engine 4 game, and PreyDog is coming out with a universal Unreal Engine for 4 and 5 VR injector, and so you're going to be able to play this game in real VR with in-engine VR cameras very soon. So maybe hold off on this one in VorpX. If you haven't ever played the game, don't play it until you've played it in VR. Trust me. If you want really, one nice thing about this one, it's another one that's like procedurally scary. It's got randomized scares throughout. The ghosts show up at different times. It's a PT style walking sim. You're in this massive house, and you've got to figure out all of these things that happen in this house. It's like a series of horrible events that have happened throughout time, and you kind of jump in and out of all of them. It's really mind-bending puzzles, really, really great effects, just kind of making you feel like you're going completely insane. It's absolutely one of the scariest games I've ever played in my life. But yeah, instead of playing on VorpX, wait for that Unreal injector, because I know when that thing comes out, I'm definitely running through this game again so I can experience it in really, really good VR and not just like a VorpX type experience. So yeah, Sad Square Studios Visage, definitely pick this one up. And this brings us to the mother of all VR games that you can experience. Well, not even a VR game, horror game that you can experience in VR, and that is Alien Isolation from Sega. Oh my god, this game. You use a mod called Mother VR mod from Nibri, or Nibre, I'm not really sure how you pronounce his name, and it is the absolute best horror experience that you could have in VR. I love the Alien franchise, at least up to maybe even Alien 3, but the first two movies were fantastic, and this game is my favorite entry into that lore, into that Alien franchise. It is so good. You're on this massive space station called Sevastopol. You're Amanda Ripley's daughter, or you're Amanda Ripley. You're Ripley's daughter. Why can't I think of her name? Ellen Ripley. But anyway, you're trying to find out, you're her daughter, and you're trying to find out what happened to her 15 years ago. So this takes place between Alien 1 and Aliens. Or Alien and Aliens, it's just amazing. This set, it's one of the absolute best sets I've ever been in. That space station, the Sevastopol, is just freaking massive and so detailed, and just awe-inspiring moments when you walk into the first big lobby area and the big shutters, and you can see the planet outside. Just absolutely incredible. It feels so much like the movie from the 70s as far as the environment and what things look like and the way the computers work, and even things like Mother, the computer system. It's very, very reminiscent of the first two movies. The alien itself, he or she, whatever, I'm gonna say he is completely procedural where he shows up. In most cases, there's a couple of scripted areas he shows up, but you just never know. It's always different, and it is absolutely the best AI I have ever experienced playing with. It feels like you're dealing with a real creature. And in VR, oh my God, he's so goddamn scary. And so, you have the alien. You also have to deal with humans that are trying to kill you because they're all freaked out and scared. You've got face huggers at some points. You've got these damn working Joe androids that have all gone berserk and they're trying to kill you. It's such a great game. I think when I played it, I played it for it's 22 hours. It's a huge game. It took me 22 hours to beat. It's got a ton of great DLCs that include some of the original characters from the Nostromo, including Ripley herself. So it's got the whole crew there that you can deal with. I cannot say enough that this is the absolute best VR horror experience you can have still to this day. With all the other stuff that's happened, the AAA quality, the length of the game, the absolute fantastic storytelling, everything is perfect about this. Yes, it's a gamepad game. I get that. Some people won't, but really it's Alien Isolation. I mean, there's not much you can do with your hands anyway, except maybe hold up your little motion detector thing. So yeah, it's the best. So there you have it, guys. That's my list of all the best games that you can play in VR, horror games that is. So yeah, hey, make sure you hit like and subscribe and click on the little bell thingy and all that fun stuff, and comment on the video. Tell me what your scariest games are that you've played. I'd love to talk to you about them. I'd love to find some really scary games that I could play myself that I haven't yet. In VR, of course, that's my stipulation. So yeah, guys, I hope this was a fun one for you. Thanks for watching. Dr. Greg out.